Welcome. Welcome to the USC Roski School of Art and Design Lunch with Creatives Alumni Series. I'm Haven Lynn Kirk, the Dean of the Roski School, and thank you for taking time out of your day and this hectic, anxiety-filled election week to join us for a much-needed creative pause. Before we begin, I wanted to give you a little bit background about this series. Lunch with Creatives was designed to highlight creative conversations around timely topics with art and design professionals. As I said, this fall series, we're featuring our talented alums who have very diverse and unusual careers with creative trajectories that reflect back to the important values that our school holds. I'm so pleased to be here this morning with 2007 BFA alum, Yuji Sakuma. And just a little bit about Yuji. He's based here in Los Angeles, and he's the design director at Seed, microbio science company that's pioneered the application of bacteria to improve human and environmental health. Really interesting stuff that he's been doing. His previous roles have taken him coast to coast, from Los Angeles to New York City and internationally to London. He's worked with a variety of clients such as Target, BBC, Estee Lauder, Nike, MoMA, Garrett Lane, and Netflix. Yuji's curiosity and diverse interests are traits that our school holds important. And thank you for joining us today, Yuji, and welcome. So,
thank you.
Before we begin, we have a silly little thing that we do where I ask the speakers what they have in their virtual lunch bags, because we can't actually have lunches together. So let's see. Today I have like a hot dog eraser, an ice cream cone, strawberry, some kind of tart.
Mine look to be all
yeah,
desserts.
Desserts, all desserts, yeah. Right. All right. Well, first of all, Yuji, you have such a diverse range of experiences after your time at USC. So maybe you can give us a little overview of your trajectory from USC to your current path now and where you are at Seed.
Yeah, and thank you all for joining. I know, like Haven said, it's been kind of a chaotic week, so I'm happy to just have a moment to think about other things for an hour. Yeah, I had graduated in 2007, and I mean, I was fortunate in that it was sort of right before the economy kind of tanked, and you know, I think at the time it was still very much like, oh, I'm gonna move to New York, I don't have a job, but like, we'll just see what happens. And very, you know, fortunate that I was able to do that, and was able to do a few internships and kind of really be maybe a bit more particular than I think you know, people are having to be now, where they just maybe have to like immediately find a job right after school. I think there was a little bit more freedom in that respect, and so kind of after a few internships, I started at Huge, which I'm going to go through some work in a bit, but digital design agency that's probably when I started, it was around 60 people. And I think now it's, I think upwards of like 1,200 or something, kind of crazy. It was, I think originally it was called Huge to be this sort of like ironic, you know, name for this sort of small scrappy agency. And it turned into actually like a very huge agency. But was there for quite a few years, you know, very much UX centric sort of design agency. It was interesting that I think at the time too, digital was still kind of new-ish. Like it was definitely kind of top of mind for a lot of companies, but even, you know, for designers too, it was sort of the least sort of sexy thing I think you could do. And I remember I was sort of had been interviewing at GQ sort of when I got the offer, and you know, I was like wanting to get into editorial, and that seemed so much, you know, cooler, and kind of begrudgingly took this job offer. And you know, kind of unbeknownst to me, and I think it ended up being such an amazing kind of foundation for a lot of the work that I've kind of done subsequently. So was there for a few years in New York, and then they opened an office in in London. So got to move to London for a few years, and that was a really amazing experience. Came back to New York for a bit, worked at another agency called Wednesday, was there for about a year, decided I wanted to move back to the West Coast. I'm from Seattle originally, and I think I'm just a very West Coast person. So LA kind of appealed to me, and worked huge in Los Angeles for a bit, and then worked at Faraday Future, which is an electric car startup, which I'll talk about that in a second, a bit more in depth. And then went back to agency side. And then about a year ago, I started at Seed, which again, I'll talk about more in depth in a second. But it's been kind of very, at times random, but I think, you know, when I think about, I guess, just the trajectory as a whole, I think each thing has really kind of led to the next. And I think that each you know, experience that I've had has been something that has informed, you know, my next decision, as sort of disparate or as kind of random as they might seem. So yeah, it's been an interesting kind of journey, and it's funny, kind of, I was pulling a bunch of images for this, and it just you're kind of reminded of how quickly time goes. Also just the amount of just stuff that I've done, and just feeling really, you know, grateful for that, and to be able to be talking about it here.
Right. So, because I obviously knew you when you were in school. At that time, I was, you know, I was a teaching faculty and not the dean of the school. And it was interesting to me because, you know, there was this migration at that time, especially with, I think, design students, that they wanted to get to New York. And, you know, that was like the pipe dream, to be able to work in New York. And it was always interesting to me, you know, not just how you got there, but I don't know if the word is determination. It was just kind of this, you know, this is what I'm going to do. And you know, obviously at that time, as you said, you know, it was right before the economic downturn, which was a very scary time. But so many of our designers did so well. And I'm curious about that. Like, what do you think it was that, you know, allowed you not just to land on your feet when you were there, but, you know, to carve out this, as we said, you know, I mean, you've worked at some very interesting companies, very, you know, the type of work that they do is not very traditional, like even agency work.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you think that came from?
I mean, I think I think I've always had a pretty like natural curiosity for things. And I think, you know, I mean, that so much of design is really about kind of diving into that and like unpacking that. And so I think that has definitely helped. I mean, I do think, just logistically speaking, in terms of, you know, like even moving to New York, I think there was a program when I was at USC where we got to go to New York for like a week. I don't remember how long it was. I think actually at the time we went, there was like a snowstorm or something, and we got stuck there longer. But I mean, that was like such an amazing experience. And I think, you know, where we visited different studios and agencies, and I remember just talking to a woman who was pretty junior at the company, and I remember just thinking like, oh, like I could totally do this. Like she just was so, I mean, and as everyone is, like, they're just like normal people. But I think, you know, at the time you're just like, oh my God, going to New York and and so I think seeing that and just kind of being able to see myself in that space, I think really helped. And that was kind of just like, well, might as well try it. And so I think it was a, you know, a mixture of a few things. But
and a lot of quiet tenacity, I think. You had a lot of quiet tenacity. Okay, so let's look at some work, because I know that people love that. That's always appealing, and also your work is so beautiful. So you can go ahead and share. So if you
can you guys see the?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I mean, I just kind of broke it down by, it goes chronologically, but just through some of these agencies and places that I've worked. So starting with Huge, again, it was, very digitally focused. This is just it's actually so long ago now that I don't really have much documentation, which is really bad, but it's like 10 plus years old. And it's funny seeing like devices and stuff when you comp up work, you usually put in like an iPhone or like an iPad, and just seeing some of the really old, devices with like huge bezels that we used to comp up in. But um, Huge. I mean, I think what was so great about this experience was, again, like just the foundation around like UX and UI, and also just getting to work on, really large scale projects. I worked on like Target.com, JetBlue, Reuters, British Airways. Like it just was so beyond anything that I had ever, kind of thought of, and really getting to cut my teeth in that way was, I think, very scary at the time, but also, looking back on it now, again, it was such a huge kind of foundation for a lot of the stuff that, I've kind of gotten up to since then. Just a few projects. I got to redesign the MoMA store website, which was really exciting. Again, this was quite a long time ago, so it's probably very, very different at this point, but was a really exciting project. Got to do some work for Nike, which was super cool. A lot of like user research, and kind of getting a taste of that side of things too was really exciting. We did a big project for Nike Kids. And then another big project, this was really when I was in the London office, was for this direct-to-consumer brand for Diageo, which is one of the world's like largest spirits companies. They own like Johnny Walker and Tanqueray and all these kind of higher end labels. And they were trying to create an online store that, where they could sell to consumers at home. And so we created this brand from scratch, and was really, looking at how do you create a really, it was kind of like Mr. Porter or Net-a-Porter for spirits, essentially. So even the packaging, really thinking about like what that might look like. So a very like varied amount of work while I was at Huge, everything from really like e-com to some branding work like this. But it was really, again, super foundational for me, and very grateful that I kind of like fell into it the way that I did. Wednesday was another agency that I worked for. This is out in New York. They, again, mostly focused on digital, but really focused on luxury and kind of fashion. So that was interesting, where again, building off of that foundation that I had at Huge, but I think from like an aesthetic standpoint, a lot of the work that we were doing at Wednesday was much more, elevated. And so I think it pushed me in that regard, which was, really, really exciting. And then Faraday, so this is the electric car startup that I was at for about a year. This was the first time I had been in-house, so that was a really exciting kind of change for me. I also have always been super into cars. I think before even, like when I was a kid, I wanted to be a car designer, and that was like a huge thing for me. And so when I got the opportunity, I was like, of course, I want to, try this. And I don't think they're doing very well now, but it was still really, cool to be there. And I was literally sitting next to like an interior designer, an exterior designer, and then one of this example was from the colors, materials, and finishes team, which they literally just look at like the textiles that go into a car, the exterior colors, and getting to be a part of a team where you're working hand in hand with all these different types of creative people to really define a brand was really, really exciting. And even getting to like commission a typeface for the brand, or work on the photography, the art direction for that, and then kind of seeing that all kind of come together was really, really exciting, and was the first time that I had felt like that I got the chance to really see something through to that degree. I think when you work at an agency, oftentimes you do your best to create really beautiful work, but then at a certain point there is like a handoff, and you kind of have to like hope for the best. And like sometimes the client does a really good job and like they execute what you know had in mind, but oftentimes it's like you see it in the real world and you're like, oh, that's not what I had wanted. And obviously when you're internal, like you really get that ownership and get to see it all through. So that was really exciting for me, and very, you know, again, very informative. And then from Verde, I went back to the agency side, and Use All 5 is a smaller agency based here in LA, about like 20-ish people, half designers, half developers. So kind of everything from branding to digital work to just straight up development, like tech, like creative technology, that sort of thing. So that was also, again, a really nice shift, you know, going from having working predominantly in a very like digital heavy space to kind of going back to, you know, a much more diverse range of work. So got to work on, you know, everything from, again, like kind of digital e-com type work to branding. This was a brand that we had kind of come up with from scratch, a direct-to-consumer brand, just a bunch of stuff, you know. Like I think that one of the cool things about working at a smaller agency, like, you know, somewhere like Huge, these bigger places, you end up kind of working on a project for like 2 to 6 months. Like you're just really dedicated to one project. And, you know, when you're at a smaller place, just inevitably you have to kind of juggle like 3 or 4 projects at a time. And so, you know, I was at Use All 5 for maybe a little under 4 years. And that, I mean, I don't even know how many projects I worked on. It was like such a crazy amount, but really kind of fun to have that diversity. And I think one of the things that was cool too, I think towards the end of that time, I think probably like 3 years ago, 4 years ago, I feel like a lot of people started to, I think partially due to maybe how democratized design is now, that I think a lot of designers have started to really think about like the intention behind what they're doing, like the why, you know, a bit more. And I think at Use All 5 too, because we were quite small, there was the opportunity to really start to, you know, pick out the type of work that we wanted to do. And so there was this pretty clear shift, I think, where we were starting to take on projects that, again, had a bit more intention, or, you know, felt like we were doing something with a purpose. And I mean, like this was just a startup, but they, you know, were really about mindfulness and meditation. And so this was kind of like a branding project that we worked on. There was another project called Saturday Morning, which was around, you know, racial inequality and injustice, and this group of Black like C-level execs who were in the tech industry who wanted to create these peace briefs and ask for responses from students and young kids, and was a really beautiful project that we got to help with. There was a project I worked on with Google Creative Lab, and this really prolific dancer named Bill T. Jones, and was all around using this technology. I think it was called PoseNet, but where you use your camera and it can really track your body, and really thinking about dance and, you know, how do you add meaning to that. So it was around like adding text onto some of these different movements, which was really a cool project. And then one that we just did internally too, we were looking at accessibility and, you know, color contrast. So we created this tool where anyone could go and, you know, add these different hex values and start to see, you know, color contrast, and make sure that those were ADA compliant. And you can add, you know, up to like, I think it was like 10 different colors, and kind of see how those work. So yeah, I mean, I think with Use All 5, it was really around, you know, getting to work on a bunch of different stuff, and then also starting to kind of narrow in onto the type of work that I wanted to be doing, and feeling much more purposeful in that way. And which leads really well into my current role, which is, like Haven was saying, is at Seed. So we really work in the world of bacteria and looking at microbes and how, you know, they can impact human and planetary health. And we have a few different kind of pillars, I suppose. One that's the focused on therapeutics. So like we have a sister company called Luca that is studying the vaginal microbiome and looking at live medicines, so bacteria-based medicines that could, help with things like UTIs and preterm birth and like really kind of amazing, important work. And then there's a whole group of people looking into really environmental health. So things like probiotics for honeybees or bioplastics and things like that. And then the one that is the most kind of consumer facing is the kind of the core seed brand, which is currently our main product is a probiotic. But it's, again, I think going back in-house, it's been really exciting. I think kind of doing really important, I think, work within the kind of health world and getting to really, again, have like ownership over all these different touch points. Like this is new packaging that we had just launched a month ago. Sustainability is a really core tenet of our brand. And like this box is made out of algae paper. So it's like a algae paper based custom corrugate. So it's taking toxic algae blooms from the Venice canals in Italy and then making that into a paper, which we then use to create this corrugate. And the tray is made out of an injection molded paper foam. So it's super light. So great for like carbon footprint and all this stuff. And, thinking about like how we photograph our product, a lot of what I do in my day-to-day is really around, like the translation of science and how do you educate people. We did this whole kind of course on Instagram stories this summer that was really looking at the history of microbes. And again, just a very broad learning from home experience where we could teach people to, not, I think, especially since we've all been at home for the last, however long it's been, 6-7 months. It was this really great exercise. And after each chapter, there was a quiz. And at the end, you could win. We had done these sweatshirts. And so you could win, a prize sort of at the end of that. So really promoting education around, these taking like Instagram stories and doing something really creative with that. We've also been doing a lot of work with just education around COVID. And I think just, as a science company, kind of unpacking a lot of the misinformation that was going on there. So we did a lot of stories kind of updating people on, what had been happening. And then, we also do ads. Like it's a very, broad range of stuff. And, social channels are also really important, but it's really exciting work. It's really exciting to kind of, again, be working somewhere where I feel like there's a bit more integrity, in what we're doing. And granted, yes, we are selling a product, but, if you go to our Instagram, it's like, there's not a single really product on the entire feed. It's really just around education. So we take that very seriously. And so, it's kind of exciting. And I think looking back kind of holistically around what I've done, I think it's exciting to kind of see that kind of, like I was saying, drilling down further and further into kind of the type of work that you want to be doing and the, drilling into something more meaningful. So that's kind of the dump of everything. I know I kind of checked through that very quickly. So happy to talk about anything in more detail, or if Haven, I know you had some questions or thoughts, but.
So I have some questions, and then I'll open it up so our participants can speak. I didn't say this in the intro, but the intention behind the series is that it's conversational and it's unscripted, which makes it very appealing, because I know so many people, they view things for entertainment's sake, and obviously that's not what this is. Yuji, your career has just been so fascinating, and I've known you for a long time. And I knew you as a student. There's always that thing about, when you're someone's school mom, you see them in a certain light, but always, not just impressed by, the way that you built your career on top of things that you learned, and then you kind of take it and you evolve to the next level. So for me, you know, the practice of being a designer has always been about like really truly understanding messages and finding yourself in part of what it, you know, that act. And so that kind of social responsibility that we talk about sometimes, or responsibility, and your beliefs have to kind of be in place in order to have a full, you know, career as a designer. Um, I, you know, there's two places that I see in your career that I've always, you know, I've asked questions about this, and so I'll just go, you know, involve everyone else in some of the conversations that we've had. But, you know, with the smart car, that was right. As you said, you had an interest in cars, but there's a difference between having an interest in cars and then suddenly becoming a designer for smart cars. I mean, that's a huge leap for most designers to take, right? So, how did that happen? Was that something you were seeking? Was it just opportunity that presented itself? What did you learn in that role? What did you learn? You know, I'm assuming there was something that kind of happened there that led to your current position at Seed as well. That's the other place I see the huge, you know, that shift in your path that is incredibly interesting to me. I have to say.
Yeah. I mean, with Faraday, it was super random. Like, I have a friend of mine who you might, I don't know if you know her name's Christine Kim.
Mm-hmm.
I might have totally butchered her last name. Actually, I can't remember. But she's like a friend of a friend who she does screen printing, or sorry, she does letterpress. And her husband is a car designer, and he was the head of design for Faraday. And I was like at her place one time, and she was like, "Oh, would you ever, like, I don't know if you're looking, but my husband's like looking for designers for this new startup." And I was like, "Oh, I like love cars." And he had designed the BMW i3 and the i8, which I had always really liked. And so I was like, "Oh yeah, totally. Let's talk about it." And it just was one of those things where I was like, it would be kind of dumb of me not to try it, you know, like it felt very super serendipitous, like very much in my kind of wheelhouse of like what I was excited by. And so it was, I mean, it was definitely kind of like a leap of faith. I didn't really know what I was getting myself into, and it was super chaotic. And but it was also, you know, really exciting. And it was funny when I got hired, and you know, day one, I had sort of been tasked with like designing the website was kind of my, you know, initial ask, and had kind of started to poke around being like, "Oh, so is there like a style guide? Like what are the brand guidelines? Like what do I have to work with?" And like nothing existed. And so very quickly my role kind of shifted from, you know, this very sort of simple task of like designing the website into, you know, much broader, kind of deeper work into defining the brand and the brand voice. And so that's what kind of transitioned me into doing a lot more of the kind of art direction and that sort of a thing. I also got to dabble into some like the in-car interface stuff, especially because I had the kind of experience from Huge and like the UI UX work. So got to, you know, be doing like in-car touch panels. And I mean, it was just such a wild experience. But again, very much this like crash course in how do you create a brand from scratch and start to define those things, which I think has definitely been super helpful at my current job, you know, where it is, again, kind of like a startup environment where you have to wear multiple hats and, you know, be able to kind of shift very quickly from doing one thing to the next. So
that again, like I said, not just really fascinating, but, you know, I mean, in I think the best of circumstances when we're talking about our careers and everything, you know, you want experiences like that, right? Where you don't know as much, and the research actually is almost as exciting as the actual design work itself becomes, right?
yeah.
Yeah, there was something else that you said too in your intro that, you know, I really, I think it really struck a chord in me, because there is also, you know, I used to talk about this as a designer all the time. You reach a point as a designer when you have this realization that a lot of the stuff that you're making becomes like, it goes into the landfill. It becomes part of the visual noise that's in the world. And when you kind of are what happens, I think, as young designers, young designers just want to work. That's all it is. And so you kind of get pulled into kind of this workforce and you produce things for other people. And if you're good at what you do, what ends up happening is you end up becoming a decision maker. And, the questions that you asked, back to what I said before about the value system, I think that a lot of university students in particular, they develop when they're younger and they bring out into their careers. And you start to realize, you can have great impact, not just in your workplace, but around you, right? And Seed is one of those companies that, as you said, yeah, they're making a product, but it's a different kind of product, one. And there's kind of a bigger message that's behind it. So, I mean, maybe back to, it's like a trajectory question more so than anything else, because I'm really fascinated by what, how you've gone from one, some people spend their entire career in agency work. That's what they do, right? They become like branding masters or something. But it seems like that curiosity that you have, and it seems like it's probably an academic kind of a scholarly curiosity that you have, has brought you to all these different firms, but also kind of different problem solving, visual problem solving that you're doing in your workplace. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that. Like,
Yeah.
mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. Like, I don't think that I necessarily have, like, I don't think I could definitively say right now, like, oh, I'll never go back to like an agency, or, I think if I were at an agency right now, I don't think I would say like, oh, right, I'm definitely going to stay here forever. Like, I think it just, it just flexes so many different types of muscles. And like, I mean, I'm totally happy to do like client pitches and, that stuff, but it's also not, I don't know, that's like, I don't know if it's like my strongest suit. And, it's just like a funny thing where you,
right,
you kind of figure out what your strengths are and what makes sense for you. And I think for me, I do like to kind of sit and think through things pretty deeply, and I don't, react super quickly. And I think that that's something that, potentially maybe in an agency setting, it's a little harder to do that, where you are required to kind of be so quick.
Hit a deadline, right? It's
yeah, totally.
Hit a deadline.
Or have to like shift so quickly, where, you're not, at least when you're in-house, it's like you understand the reasoning and the rationale behind those sorts of decisions that are being made. But when you're at an agency and you're sort of at the whim of whatever the client wants, it is very like, kind of can be a little like whiplash sometimes. So I don't know if that really answered your question, but I think each experience does sort of, again, work different parts of you. And I think, I don't like the idea of just getting really comfortable in one thing and not, kind of flexing these other parts of myself.
Yeah, it was kind of a loaded question, because I think I actually have the answer for a lot of it as well, which is that I think what happens, like I said, back to what I was saying before, when designers, creative people are at different places in their career, they always think that there's this thing that whatever the next thing is that they need, right, professionally. But back to what I said before about, like, I think what I see is this kind of trait that runs through everything that you've done it's that curiosity, as I said, that curiosity of what to do next. And also, I think you have to be somewhat fearless too, because when you're going into like a smart car company, for example, or, a company that's science based, right? There's always this assumption as the designer, creative person, I'm going to be the least knowledgeable person in that company. And that means that you have to run extra, hard, extra fast in order to catch up, because you have to be an expert in order to be a good visual communicator.
Totally.
Right?
I mean, I think at Seed in particular, it's really, I mean, I do my best to understand the science, but sometimes it is really totally over my head. And I mean, thankfully we have entire research and development team, who are these amazing scientists and, have become great friends of mine. And so I think just being able to ask them about, these things without feeling like I'm totally stupid has been really helpful. And just, the willingness to be to not be right or to not be, you know, totally spot on each time. Like there's so many times where I'll present something and then
Yeah.
I'll just be like, okay, well, that scientifically does not make any sense, so we can't use that. And you're like, okay, cool. Like we just have to think of something else. And it is difficult, but I think that there is a really, you know, beautiful challenge in that. So it's been really exciting.
I mean, here, you know, the reason it's challenging too is because designers aren't decorators. And so when you're in a room with people that have expertise in other areas, right, you do have to hold your own because, you know, again,
Yeah.
if you flip it at the other side is you may be the only, you know, you're the only artist in the room, for example, the only designer in the room. So everything that you do has to make sense. And you have to, you know, I mean, you have to be very honed in your craft in order to be able to be effective in what you do.
Yeah, for sure.
As you said, if they come back and say, well, the science doesn't make any sense, and you realize you were just kind of decorating anyway, I mean, that we all know that that's kind of a failing on the design, right? So
yeah.
that's really fascinating. So I don't want to take up all the time, so maybe we can open it up to people that might have questions. So if I can ask, oh, Yuji, maybe you can not stop sharing your screen. And then if I could ask you all to maybe put it in a gallery view, that way we can see everybody. And if you have your videos off, please turn your videos on because it's nice to see who we're speaking to. And reminder to unmute yourself, okay? So because you may be speaking and we may not know that you're speaking. So, all right. So, yeah, this is always the awkward part, the wait. So, questions? You can ask Yuji anything. He probably.
I have a question.
Go ahead,
So,
Mark.
when you said that you worked on multiple projects, were there ever times where you kind of reuse a concept for different brands or kind of applied similar styles or like a technique? And do you think that was like, in a way, your signature on those brands?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think in particular with, I think from like an aesthetic standpoint, I'm not someone who maybe, I mean, I think everyone has certain things that they're, you know, comfortable in or that they really like to go back to. I do think, you know, from like a UX perspective, especially with like digital work, you know, you think about like best practices and like what works the best. And like I've done so many e-commerce websites at this point that it's like you sort of kind of know what needs to be there and like what you know, what works best. And which I think is also really important because I think that's when you know how to break things too, where like it's like, okay, I know the core foundation of how to make like a product page for an e-com site, but like how can I push it even further? And I think when you kind of know what really works well, like that's when you can start to have fun and kind of make it something that feels a bit different. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
Yeah.
I definitely think that there are certain things and there have been projects too where like you were saying, you know, you pitch something that doesn't get sold through, the client doesn't choose it, and you're like, okay, well, we can pocket that for another, you know, another company. So that definitely does happen.
You know, I remember because you brought up the New York trip. That was the first of the study tours that we did. And so that trip was very memorable for me as well. And also we got stuck in New York for 3 days due to a little bit of snow, which was kind of crazy to have a group of students that you're driving around and getting stuck in a city. But yeah, lots of memories from that. But one of the things I do recall, I think it was Siegel Gale did one of the best presentations because they were actually talking about, you know, when you're a successful agency and you've designed something that you become kind of known for, and then every client that comes in afterwards wants the same thing. And as you know, obviously, as a successful agency, that is the kiss of death to kind of, you know, if it's Nike, for example, to just do swooshes forever. But what I loved was the story that I think it was their creative director told that stuck with me. Instead of having, you know, these difficult conversations, because this is how designers also think, we like to be efficient in what we do, right? So they actually did an internal campaign where what they did was they did all the research on every bad version of every brand that, for example, that had the swoosh in it, right? And so when a client would come in, instead of having to explain to them why you don't want to use the same strategy to complete something, they would just kind of put this library in front of them and say, look at all this first and then come back and tell us. And then what it did was it set a tone for a real conversation with the client, because, you know, on the agency side, I know that young designers always like complain about their clients, but the reality of it is it's a good relationship. If you have a great relationship, you're going to do great work. They're going to be happy with you. It's a win-win, right? So like I said, that was one of the stories that, you know, I just thought I'd share it, because I remember that story so distinctly and thinking, and that's why this company is, you know, the branding master, that because they're not just responding, they actually have taken the helm and made it their own kind of internal problem solving.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good point too, just around like communication and like being able to articulate, you know, your thoughts in a way that are understandable. And I think oftentimes, I mean, I used to talk about this with I remember when I first moved to New York and I was taking all these meetings, a lot of people asked, you know, like why I didn't go to like art center or like an art school. And I mean, at the time it was very much this canned answer, because I didn't really know how to respond well to it, but was just like, oh, well, you know, in a university, like, you know, none of my friends were in the art program. And like, I would always have to talk about, like, if someone's like, oh, what are you doing for homework or whatever it was, projects, having to like explain yourself constantly was actually like really helpful in like having to articulate and find words for what I was doing. And whereas I can imagine if you're just, and not to say that this is a reason not to go to art school or anything, but, you know, when you're surrounded just by people who speak your language, it's like, I can imagine that being very easy in a lot of ways and like very frictionless. And I think when you do have to really like explain yourself in the real world, it's like, it was very helpful. And yeah, when you're talking to clients who know nothing about design, but know what, you know, what it looks like, it's like that skill definitely comes in handy.
I not only agree with you, I think that in my time at USC, that's one of the things I learned as a professor was watching how students resolved problems. And, you know, there's always the thing about the unique differences that you have, right? If you're in a different kind of community, and it's not, you know, having smarter designers, it is a huge, I think, benefit that, you know, now on the you know, company side, it's like that's what they are seeking, right? So yeah, it's interesting. The world is also changing so quickly, because in the past, probably even during the time when you were coming out of school, you're still kind of defining what design is. And these days, everyone knows what design is, and everyone knows what they want, right? That part of the conversation seems to have completely disappeared, which is really, it makes life a lot easier. That's for sure.
I mean, I remember when it doesn't even feel like that long ago, but when, you know, when I was at USC, and like the big sort of question was like, it was like the divide between fine art and design. Like even that was undefined. It was like, we all had the same degree. It was like, are you leaning more design or are you leaning more fine art? And like, even thinking about that now seems so crazy, where you're just like, of course they're totally different. And like, yeah, I mean, I think, you know, we've just evolved very quickly, very rapidly.
Yeah. Well, again, like I said, you know, the visual language right now seems to be the predominant language. I mean, you know, yeah, like I said, just in the last, you know, 20 years, you can go to any country and see a billboard and know what it is that they're selling, and probably could guess at what the message is. And that wasn't the case like 20 years ago. 20 years ago, the US had a certain very distinct kind of designed message and everything, but now the whole world has that universal message, which is kind of interesting. So yeah. So how about anyone else? Please don't be shy, because again, like I said, this is intended to be, you know, conversational and more relaxed, and again, Yuji's so, you know, kind to join us at this lunchtime hour and everything, and you know, he's happy to answer questions. Mars, did you have another question?
If no one else has a question.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering, how did you navigate through when you had opportunities to include like inclusivity, like imageries of diversity into a brand's assets that they're asking for, that might not be within their specific targeted demographics or consumer base?
It's a good question. I mean, I do think that it really, I mean, I think maybe 3-4 years ago, sadly, I think is probably when I think I started to see that as like something that has come up. I mean, it's an interesting thing. Like, I mean, even at Seed now, we talk about it a lot. Like we're in the middle of really trying to define like, talking about humans and how you include that into, our brand voice. And it's tricky, but I'm trying to think if there were other specific clients that I worked with where that came up. But I mean, it's hard. It's like you also don't want to be, kind of like tokenize, and so it's like it needs to feel very, I think, authentic. At the end of the day, as long as you're representing what is true to that company, then I feel like that's where it really resonates and feels truthful. But you also can't like force it either. We did like a pitch, I remember, for Red Bull when I was at Use All 5, Red Bull, the Music Academy, I think, the festival that they had here in LA. And we talked a lot about that, and, just really embracing like Los Angeles and the diversity of communities here. And part of our pitch was really around, hyper kind of local activations where, like in K-Town, maybe all the billboards are, they would be in Korean, they would be related to Korean culture and how that tied into the festival, and being very much like specific in that way. I also did a project for the main museum, which I think they closed, but they were downtown. But our whole thing with them was really about everything within the brand was bilingual, so both English and Spanish, and figuring out even with typography, like, when we were in English using one typeface versus in Spanish, and really like identifying that whole system was really exciting, and something that they were really excited by. I'm trying to think. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if that totally answers your question, but it is a really interesting topic that, I think even in this year or two, it's obviously been, I think it will just become more and more of an important kind of thing for us to really like think through when we work with clients, or when you're, even when you're working in-house.
This is not a good comparison, but if you've been around as long as I have, right? It's one of those things that it's always encouraging when you start to see these changes, but you can also see when someone is doing it as a strategy and when it's actually done for the right reason. Yeah. And I'm such a huge believer in like authenticity. I mean, it's ironic to say this, right? Because if you're doing advertising and marketing, people always have this assumption that you're trying to trick them into something. But that's not really what good design is. Good design is, understanding your message and communicating it effectively. And I think that when you're talking about, really, the point behind it isn't just to manipulate people to do something or to buy something. The reality of this is the reason good, communication works, and why it needs to be open and accessible to lots of different groups is because there are lots of different groups of people. That's really the reality of it, right?
Yeah.
And they shouldn't feel uncomfortable when they see something for the first time. Or, I used to tell people this, that when I first started at USC, there weren't any Asian, students taking design. And in my career, I can only remember 2 or 3, Asian designers. And it's not just we kind of knew each other. If we saw each other in a room, it's like, always kind of there's, there's Maeda or there's somebody else, right? And it was uncomfortable in some ways, because it's, in some ways you wanted to just be a person and you just wanted to be a designer, but then at the same time you felt that these things that you felt were important, that you were struggling with internally, you wanted to be able to publicly speak about them. So we're in a really wonderful place right now in that way, which is we can actually openly have a conversation. I hope the awkwardness kind of goes away at some point too, because
I mean, I think even this year, it's really dramatically shifted where I think that it has a lot. And I've had conversations, both, professionally and personally, like this year that, I don't think would have been possible. Well, I mean, they would have been possible, but it just, would have been much, much, much more, I think, uncomfortable or less, uh, like taken to heart, as I think it has been this year. So
it's hard to do on Zoom for people to see the sincerity in your face or to understand that, like they're not just emotional topics. I mean, you have people that are really personally invested in making sure that, whatever the next step is the right step. So yeah. It's too bad, like I said, we can't all be in person because, then body language says it, or, a touch or whatever. So yeah. So that leads me to, I have one last question, but then if anyone else has a question, and again, like I said, please don't feel uncomfortable. This is intended to be kind of a safer place to ask questions as well. But I'm going to ask the elephant in the room one, right? We talked a little bit about the pandemic. We talked a little bit about, social issues, and then we're in the middle of this like very, anxiety fraught election right now. But, how's this affecting you, Yuji? What, how's this changed? I know you're working from home, like all of us are working from home, but I mean, have you learned something from this? Are there things that you love that you're taking away from the pandemic? Are there things that you hate that you wish, you can't wait to get back to?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been, I think, like all of us, a very like heavy learning curve in terms of working from home. I've never been someone that, I've never really freelanced. It's always been like, I have an office to go to. I'm like there from 9 to 5, whatever. And so this idea of a much more kind of gray zone, like day where I kind of, and we do obviously have hours, but I think learning to figure out sort of how I work best in this environment it's taken me a second, but I think sort of where I've netted out is I'm much, much more flexible, I think, with, the way that I structure my day. And for better, for worse, like I do think, some days you're just like not as like tuned in. I think this week has obviously been pretty intense. And so I think that, have been quite distracted, and just finding the moments where I do feel creatively, able, and kind of allotting that time for it. I found myself like working quite late, which not the best, I guess, but where I'm like, okay, it's like 4 p.m. I just need some time to myself, and let me just not work for a few hours. I'll have dinner, like go for a walk, exercise, whatever, and then I'll just come back after and really, kind of focus. And so it's been great in that respect, where I think I've been better attuned to kind of what I need to be creative and productive. But yeah, I mean, it's just like a weird time for all of us, I think. So I'm sure, I mean, I know for you guys too, just like the academic setting, I'm sure is just like completely upended. So
yeah, definitely has been. Yeah. So any other questions?
Yeah, I had a question.
Sure.
Hi. So I came a little bit late, so I apologize if you already answered this, but I'm currently a high school senior. And in the past few years, I've begun exploring the professional design community and reaching out to members of the design community. And a lot of the times I don't get any responses. Sometimes I do. And I really like doing it because I can not only learn about people's experiences and journeys as designers, but maybe gain some field experience for myself. But like I said, a lot of the times I don't get fruitful outcomes. So I was wondering, you're a young designer, I think, and you're obviously very successful.
That was a big compliment.
Yeah. So I was wondering if you had any suggestions for me for how to reach out and begin exploring this next chapter of my life.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's amazing that you're doing that. I think it's, I think that sort of attitude, will get you very far. I mean, I think sometimes it is just people are really busy, and it can be really difficult. When I moved to New York, I was saying earlier that I didn't have a job, and the first thing I did, actually, even before I flew out there, was I just kind of like cold emailed all these people who I was just like fans of, or like, you know, whatever. And very much kind of just like, hey, like, I'm going to be moving to New York. I don't really know a lot, you know, a lot of people there, but I just would love if you could maybe spend some time, like, would love to show you some work, like very sort of just kind of not, you know, looking for a job or anything like that, but really, you know, some conversations. And I do remember, you know, I got to meet with, I mean, it's been so long now, I don't even remember who I spoke to, but, you know, like someone at Pentagram, or like everyone was actually pretty, not everyone, but, you know, maybe like half of the people were responsive. And I think it is just about continuing to do that, and being persistent to a certain degree. Like, you don't want to be like emailing them nonstop, but I think that sometimes you do just have to kind of like, you know, like be present and show yourself. And I think, I mean, it sounds like you're doing that. So I think it might just be doing, you know, doing more of the same, and trying to find the people that are willing to take that time. But yeah, it's wonderful that you're doing that. And that makes me very happy.
I like that David Lipton just said, if you're reaching out to a person over 40 years old that doesn't respond to email or social media, maybe try them by phone. That's not a bad idea. Surprisingly, people, you know, they get on the phone these days. But I also have to say, I agree with Yuji that, you know, I've seen, I mean, surprised that, you know, some very, very, very famous designers, for example, when you have a college student that's coming out of school, just asking for advice. And it's always important to say that you're just asking for advice, or just, you know, to have a few minutes of their time. The best thing about the design community is they are very generous people. They really are. They will talk to you. Just don't ask that for an hour of their time to review a portfolio, because the assumption is they think that you're going to hit them up for a job. But you'll meet a lot of people that way. And I you know, hundreds of the reason I'm such a coffee addict is because of all the coffee meetings I've had in my career, meeting with young designers that just needed a few minutes to talk, and over a cup of coffee. It's just, it's a great way of doing it. And you're a high school student, you have plenty of time. So yeah.
I also agree. When I graduated a year ago, 2 years, I don't know. I felt very lost, and I really wasn't quite sure how to enter the job industry. And I got a lot of help by just calling or emailing alumni, or just people I met, like teachers, professors, people I volunteered with, and I would just sit with them. I asked to meet with them, sit with them, and literally just ask about their experience. Not ask about, can I get a job, or like, can I get an internship? Just ask about their experience. And it was very comforting to hear them, knowing that there's a similar path. Mm-hmm. And knowing what they went through emotionally as well kind of comforted me, and know that, give me reassurance that things will be fine as long as I continue to try. Right. And for me, one thing I learned is that there's always success and failure. So even when you fail, there's something that you learn from it. So
yeah,
and I think that like one of the things too, with kind of going back to maybe, you know, how, I mean, maybe it's just social media, but like how accessible things are, that I think that there is this sense of like, you see where people are like way down the line. And like, I think knowing that things do take time, and that, you know, it's not going to be this like, I mean, obviously it does happen for some people, but just that there's a lot of work that goes into it, and just understanding that, you know, just giving yourself that time to not like freak out that you're not doing XYZ, you know, 1 year from now or whatever, that it's okay for, you know, things to kind of build slowly, and for you to kind of figure it out as you go.
So Priya has a question. Go ahead. Priya.
Sorry, let me unmute do the camera thing really quick. Okay, great. You guys are looking at the wrong camera. I'll look at a different direction. But I just wanted to say, Zoe, I literally just did this. I graduated in 2019, and I had the exact same worries as you coming into USC. I don't know if you're committed to USC or if you're going next year, but like a huge resource for me was my professors at Roski. Like, they are so talented and so like well accredited, and they're more than easy to talk to, and they're going to help you through like all those steps. They're great resources as well as connections within Los Angeles. I know a lot of my professors have connections to where I work right now, and I'm able to have those types of discussions with them. And even Haven used to be my teacher, and now she's the dean of Roski, and I still communicate with her now and then. So yeah, really relying on your professors and teachers is going to be like a giant resource and help.
Yeah, I agree. Again, the Trojan network is a real thing. I didn't have it in school. I'm very envious of it. But at the same time, not just encourage you to explore that. Whether you come to USC or not, you'll find that there's some very kind people that are, are part of the school itself, and they will speak to you. We have one other question. Let's see. I'm sorry, I'm not going to butcher your name. Yu Yang, is that it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hi.
Yeah. So I have a question for like a working aspect of designers. So I want to ask you about this phenomenon of like side hustles or side projects or personal projects. Yep. I know it's like super popular right now because the industry is getting very competitive, and I know a lot of companies is expecting this kind of projects from you, like some your personal interests besides your 9-to-5 work. So I just wondering, what are some of the influences that side project or personal projects have on your career, and what's your like general view on this topic?
So
yeah, I mean, I think
I was just going to say there's other designers on this call too. I mean,
yeah,
students on this call, you should ask a whole bunch of people, because I think you're going to see that there's, it's an interesting conversation. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me personally, it's as someone looking at other people's work, I think it is really, I love seeing, stuff outside of, even if it's totally unrelated, like if it's just like photography or, just other kind of creative outlets. I think it's always, like nice to just see like holistically what someone's interests are, or like what their, creative process looks like outside of that. I will say, like, I mean, I think when I was younger, it was sort of easier or more, I think I had more space kind of like mentally to be able to kind of shift and stuff. I think right now, I think particularly during this time, it's been a little bit more like, let me just really focus on my work, and then kind of limit. I've been very selective, I guess, in terms of like freelance work that I'll take, just because I know that I do feel really, or it's just easy to feel very overwhelmed right now. So I'm trying to, limit that. But I mean, I have so many friends who are, I think, I wouldn't say they're like, obviously not thrilled with what's happening, but like it sort of has allowed them to take on other projects, or has sort of, forced them to kind of branch out or do other types of work, which, so yeah, I think, I mean, like Haven's saying, I think it really depends on who it is, but yeah, I mean, it's a thing for sure, a side hustle.
I tell students this all the time. You don't want to be taken advantage of, right? But when you decide that you're going to be a creative person, a creative professional, you have to embrace it wholeheartedly. It's not something you can only do like 9-to-5. And even, the other side of it is that if anyone starts by coming to you and telling you what a great opportunity it is, block them out and look at the opportunity and decide if it's really something that you want to do. Because the other part of this is like, you can get burnt out really quickly doing
totally.
And I really don't recommend it. And back in the day, AIJ used to have a statement about asking students not to do things like this, because you don't ask your dentist to do spec work. You don't ask your doctor to do spec work. We're professionals, and to have respect for the field means to understand that we should be compensated for the good work that we do. But the other side of it is there's so much opportunity to do. Designers have a talent and skill that they can bring to other aspects of their lives. I've done so much pro bono work for nonprofits, for example, or if it's something that I just feel that, I just want to do it because I like what their message is, it's my time, but it's my decision to do it. It shouldn't be a client trying to convince you to do work for free. If that's the case, then, I would view that with some suspicion, and don't think that if you turn something like that down, your entire career is over. Just go on Indeed right now and look up, design. I think there's like 1,200, positions right now in the city of LA. I check it regularly for students. So back to what I said before about there's not just one pathway into it. You really have to, keep all options open and preserve, your own sanity whenever you can. So yeah, that's how you learn professionalism actually. So, okay, so we're a little past time and I'm so sorry to keep us a little longer, but this was great. Yuji, thank you so much. And I'm also going to thank you for, representing us so well out there. So I'm always saying this, that it's not, it's not when you see rankings or you see what people say about our school, it's our alums that actually represent how strong our program has been. And, he's one of many, but he's definitely, an incredibly interesting creative person, and he does really remarkable work. And I hope that, if you're pursuing design or if you're in the design field, that you have the same kind of career that he's had, which, again, I'm sure it's very fulfilling and again, just remarkable. So Zoe has one last question and then we can end on that and say goodbye. How's that sound, Zoe?
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Hi, so I'm in the process of curating my design portfolio right now. And if you go on YouTube, there's just so many designers that are my age that are just so talented, probably more talented than me artistically. So I was just wondering, in your experience as a professional designer, do you find that the most successful designers are extremely talented artistically, or could they also be talented artistically, but also creative thinkers? So just both of those together instead of just extremely art heavy.
Yeah, I mean, I think, what's exciting, I think, as you work with different people is you see, no one is the same, and like no one has the same exact skill set. And I think no project requires the same type of designer either. And so I think it's really, we do a lot. I've worked on many projects where there are like creative strategists, or, they're not necessarily doing the the design themselves, but are really there as like helping to really concept or do a lot of the thinking behind kind of before it goes into design. So yeah, I mean, I think as long as when you're putting a portfolio together, it's like it's representing who you are and like what your interests are. Like I think that and if you can talk really eloquently about what it is that you want to do. And that's to me the most, when I can see someone in their portfolio, I think is when I'm like, okay. And then it's like, even if it's not the right fit for the project I'm looking for, it's like, I might be like, oh, like this person's super interesting, they should talk to this person. Or, it's like, it's much better to have, I think, that kind of point of view. And I think if you basically just like not try to be something you're not or someone you're not, I think is super, super helpful, and having that clarity. And I mean, I've been really amazed. There's so many, talented young designers who kind of know that from a very young age. And I think the times when you see a portfolio that's much more kind of broad, you kind of don't really know who this person is. I think that's when it's easier to be more dismissive or just be like, oh, that's not the right fit. But again, I think having a really strong point of view is helpful. So, I mean, it's great that you're, doing that research and kind of like trying to figure that out, because I think that'll be super helpful for you as you start to put your portfolio together.
Thank you.
Right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. We will be announcing the spring series in the next month or so. It will be slightly different than this fall, but if you're joining us today, again, we're so happy to see everyone here. And thank you so much, and good luck with the rest of the week, and hang in there. I think we're almost through this whole election process now. All right. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.